Deputy Chair and Minister, I want to welcome you to the House and to thank you for bringing forward this very important piece of legislation which is going to help many thousands of families right across this country, particularly in affected counties. I want to firstly acknowledge that while the passage of this legislation has encountered some opposition in the lower house over the allocated time that was given to it, it's important to note and acknowledge the extensive work that was carried out by the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Housing, Local Government and Heritage, who carried out 3 extensive engagements over 8 hours on Friday week last with industry experts including SCSI, the Institution of Engineers of Ireland, department officials, the Housing Agency, the chair of the expert working group, and most importantly, we heard from representatives of the families affected by defective blocks. We heard from the Micah Action Group in Donegal, the Clare Pyrite Action Group and the Mayo Pyrite Action Group. And I want to acknowledge the work of these groups and many more individuals who have campaigned tirelessly on this issue to ensure a scheme is put in place which will allow them the opportunity to get their lives back on track. Following that engagement, Minister, the Joint Oireachtas Committee sent a cross-party letter to you asking that a number of items will be considered, and I know that many of them can be addressed by regulation, and it's important that that flexibility is built into the bill, which I believe it is. The Defective Concrete Blocks Bill before us underpins a new enhanced scheme to help homeowners with crumbling homes to rebuild and move on with their lives. It is an unprecedented multi-billion euro state intervention that certainly marks an improvement on the old scheme. While some may be of the view that there is no rush in getting this piece of legislation through the Oireachtas before the summer recess, I don't subscribe to that viewpoint, because without it we're essentially saying that we operate on the old system, which doesn't include the counties of Limerick and Clare and offers a maximum grant of up to €247,500 rather than the €420,000 contained in this bill. The bill contains many welcome changes to the original scheme and even on the initial draft of this scheme. It's important to acknowledge that these changes were made in response to feedback from affected homeowners and that the changes were recommended by the expert working group. Those changes include the likes of a retrospective inclusion, an appeals process, a legal footing for certificate of remediation, and the Housing Agency taking on the cost of testing. Gone is the sliding scale, and foundations and other materials are currently being reviewed by the NSAI, and the scheme can, of course, be changed by regulation if required. The bill has at its core an ambition to provide a fair and equitable solution to homeowners affected by defective concrete blocks. I want to acknowledge the work that is being carried out to date by the working group between June and September of last year, the expert group between January and April of this year, John O'Connor, who's acted as homeowner liaison since February to the present day, your department officials, everyone who is engaged with that forum, and also to acknowledge the work of my own Fine Gael colleagues who have worked with you, Minister, from the affected counties in a proactive way in order to better and improve this piece of legislation. While the issue of pyrite and mica hasn't yet visited my own county of Waterford, at least to my knowledge, I'm acutely conscious of the devastating impact it has had on affected counties. To feel secure and comfortable in one's home is something most people take for granted, but for the affected families, their dreams, hopes and aspirations have effectively been crumbling around them. The mental stress and strain that has been inflicted on them is immeasurable. I believe these families have waited long enough, and I want to ensure that this legislation is passed as soon as possible. I know the government is also establishing a new building standards regulator, a builders register, and has tasked the NSAI with reviewing concrete block standards to ensure the highest standards are complied with into the future. And I cannot stress the importance of that enough, Minister. We heard some very concerning testimony at the Joint Oireachtas Committee that defective materials are still being put into circulation from a quarry in the southeast, and that simply is an intolerable situation at a time when the state state is rightly putting a scheme in place which would cost taxpayers of this country in excess of €2.8 billion. But we cannot allow a scenario to arise into the future, and I would urge you, Minister, to ensure that routine and spot checking is carried out on all quarries across this country to ensure that we do not face this scenario again in 10 or 20 years' time, particularly at a time when we're putting this scheme in place. In terms of the fair and equitable package for homeowners that we're discussing, we really do obviously need to take account of inflation, and the funding model for this scheme, of course, is based on the comprehensive body of work that was carried out by the SESI, and I want to acknowledge and thank their volunteers who put in many hours of work into coming up with their formula and costings. However, there's no denying the fact that things have moved on from February to where we are now, and there has been significant cost inflation in the construction sector, even in that short period of time. And it's critical that we ensure that the payments in this scheme are adequate, they're fair, they're equitable, and that families can have the access to the right amount of money they need to build safe homes and the homes that they deserve. And I suppose if that is in place, then the issue of the downsizing, I suppose, is addressed, because we'll ensure that 100% redress is in place to allow for those people to build that size property of their choosing. Finally, Minister, in concluding, I just want to, I suppose, appeal to you and to the officials within the department and within the housing agency to ensure that this scheme is made as easy to access as possible for homeowners. We all know, Minister, as politicians, that officials can put overly complicated systems in place that make it far more difficult than is necessary for people to access. So I would just ask that things are put in simple and plain language so that people in the affected counties can access what they need to get their lives back on track. And that's what we are seeking here today to do as a government, is to ensure that people can move on with their lives and that they can access the necessary supports to do so. Thank you.